Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. On today's episode, I had the opportunity to speak with Jennifer Wagner, president of CarbonCure Technologies, which is a concrete company that puts carbon into their concrete, and then they have this technology that concrete makers will actually put into their concrete production plants, and it helps to reduce carbon emissions to a pretty large extent, as well as strengthen the concrete. So, super exciting conversation today with Jennifer. Also, something that's really kind of very cool that we'll talk about a little bit in the show is that they had some pretty exciting news that they just were able to announce shortly after we had spoken. So definitely enjoyed today's conversation. I thought it was great. She had so many good insights to offer. And as always, today's podcast is made possible and sponsored by Nextwave Partners. All right, welcome to the podcast, Jennifer. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. So, just for everybody listening, this is Jennifer Wagner from CarbonCure Technologies. And, if you want to just give us a quick background on yourself and, what's CarbonCure doing these days?
Great. Thanks, Alice. Yeah, so I'm Jen Wagner, president of a company called CarbonCure. Personally, I'm a chemist by training, but went on to do an MBA, and over the last decade have been helping our CEO and founder to scale the business. So what CarbonCure does is we've developed a technology that injects waste carbon dioxide into concrete, where it becomes permanently mineralized within the concrete. That means that the CO2 will never be released back into the air. And in addition, when we add the CO2, it actually strengthens the concrete, which allows the customer to achieve some additional performance benefits. And I think that's quite unique in what we offer, is that we're offering both an environmental but also an economic benefit to the customers.
Got it. So are you, I guess I'm curious, how, with the reduced impact of the total carbon footprint, how close can you guys get your concrete to zero carbon emissions?
Yeah, so I think we need to distinguish between some of the nomenclature, because there's a lot of jargon out there right now. There's sort of negative emissions and net neutral and net zero. So what we offer is a measurable reduction in the carbon footprint. The concrete that our customers offer the market still has a carbon footprint, and there are ways that they are working to reduce that, but it's not yet net zero. If they wanted to get to net zero, they'd have to essentially purchase carbon offsets to get to zero. And as far as I know, no concrete producer is doing that to date. I think that will change over the next few years, where there is a growing understanding that collectively all sectors need to decarbonize and get to net zero. And so that's, through first emitting less to the extent that you can, creating efficiencies within your production, adopting technologies like CarbonCures that recycle CO2, but then the remainder would need to be offset.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Obviously, it's a huge step forward in terms of what you guys are doing, and especially to me, it's fascinating the fact that it actually makes the concrete stronger to do this, right? I think that's obviously a huge selling point. I guess maybe, still as an introduction here, could you give us a little bit of kind of rundown into how you ended up in this space? Like, what was your journey to get here?
Yeah, so I think there's my own personal journey, and then there's sort of the journey of the company. So maybe I'll speak to both. So personally, I mentioned I'm a chemist, and when I was graduating, wasn't sure what I wanted to do next, so decided to do an MBA, as one does if you don't know what you want to do. And so when I was finishing up business school, I started asking around some of my profs about what kind of job opportunities somebody who was interested in sustainability, science, and business could have. And no one had a good answer. There were no jobs that combined all three areas of interest of mine. And so I didn't really like that answer. So I decided to plow forward and probably met with about 100 people for coffee, trying to figure out what was out there. And at the time, there just weren't a lot of options. But fortunately, I was able to connect with our founder, Rob, who at the time was starting a business, which would eventually become CarbonCure. He also was a chemist and had studied his research on beneficially recycling carbon dioxide within concrete production. And so when I joined up with the company, there was a couple of people on staff mainly focused on the science side. And so over the last decade, we've been working to grow the company and bring on new customers and attract some new investors and scale the business.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And didn't you, I think if I remember correctly, there was a bit of interesting news that just happened with CarbonCure. Did you want to share that as well?
That's right, Silas. So we're very proud to announce just yesterday that we were the winners of the CarbonX Prize. So this was a $20 million competition for innovators from around the world to demonstrate their technologies, which recycled carbon dioxide to make valuable products. So this is kind of cool because chemistry sort of tells you what you can and can't do. And according to chemistry, you can take carbon dioxide and actually do several things with it. You can make plastics, you can make fuels, chemicals, and building materials like concrete. And so what we did as part of the X Prize competition was demonstrated one of our new innovations, which recycles waste carbon dioxide into what's called reclaimed water. It's essentially the wash water that is used to rinse the trucks at the end of the day. And so our technology was demonstrated in Calgary, and there was a sort of parallel track running in Wyoming, and they just announced the two winners this week.
All right. Who was the other winner?
There's a company out of UCLA,
Okay.
which is kind of interesting. They're actually also demonstrating a solution for concrete. And someone asked me the other day if I was surprised that both winners were demonstrating concrete solutions, and I thought about it, and I said, actually, no, because concrete's the most abundant man-made material on Earth. Like, there's so much concrete produced, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Bill Gates has been famously quoted as saying, we'll be building another New York City every single month for the next 40 years. And most of that construction will be with concrete. And so there's an incredible opportunity for solutions that absorb CO2 into concrete, just given the vast amount of concrete that's produced every year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when I first stumbled upon CarbonCure, I figured it makes tons of sense because there is so much of it used that it is an easily, relatively easily scalable business because there's so much demand. So once you've figured out the technology, it can grow very quickly. But so congratulations to you guys on achieving that. I believe if I remember correctly, I had spoken with another fellow on the podcast who they also had applied and were finalists in the prize. But obviously, the most innovator, the best innovator is the winner. So congratulations on that.
And just on that point too, I think we always advocate for a portfolio approach. There is no best solution out there. To meet our climate targets collectively, we need a lot more solutions out there. We need all the tools in the toolbox. So there were some great innovators as finalists as part of the X Prize, and I wish them well and hope that they also are able to scale their solutions because no one company, no one technology can single-handedly solve climate change. We need nature-based solutions around planting trees and more sustainable agricultural practices, and we need to make CO2 into jet fuel, and we need to make plastics out of CO2. We need to do all these things, and only then will we be able to reach our climate targets.
Yes, 100%. I think that's something that's quite interesting that Tom Rand said in his book as well about climate capitalism. So I think that's important for a lot of people listening. If there are people listening who think that there's just one solution, it really can't be. We need to have many things in order to accomplish this goal. I guess moving on to the next kind of aspect here, I'm curious about with the technology you guys have, what are some of the other benefits aside from, again, reducing carbon footprint and then strengthening the concrete? Are there any other kind of benefits to companies using your concrete?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think what's interesting about what we offer is that there is an environmental advantage to adopting CarbonCure. So for the concrete producer's perspective, they're able to bring carbon concrete product to market. And so when you think about, they're competing on bids for, like we just did the Amazon HQ2 campus, it can be a real point of differentiation over their competitors who are just selling the gray stuff. And so we're finding that a lot of our customers are getting an advantage in the marketplace because end users, the builders and the architects and the designers, want lower carbon building materials without having to pay more. And so we're finding that that's been a major driver for adoption across all of our plants, is that it's a real differentiating factor. So it's not just about doing the right thing, reducing your carbon footprint, but there's also business reasons to adopting these types of technologies.
Got it. So financially speaking, it can be a lot more feasible for them to win those bids. I guess I'm curious in terms of kind of the production process. Could you walk us through a little bit of how it works? Does it actually, is the concrete cheaper than standard, conventionally produced concrete? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So once we agree to work with a new concrete producer, what we would do is we've actually had to revamp all of this because of COVID. We used to send engineers on planes to install the equipment, but now we do that all virtually. So we would send the equipment down. If you picture like two small toaster-sized boxes, they would get shipped to the concrete plant, and then the plant staff would get on a Zoom call with our engineers at our headquarters, and they would walk them through the installation. So we've had to really convert to more of a plug-and-play type system. So once the technology is installed, there's a little bit of an optimization process to make sure that it's running smoothly with their operations. But they're up and running and making this low-carbon concrete relatively quickly. Another element is on the CO2 capture side. People often ask, well, where do you get the CO2? So the CO2 actually comes from any source. We don't care where it comes from. It could come directly from the air. It could come from industrial sources like ethanol production, or it could even come from cement production. Most of our customers source their CO2 from ethanol plants. And so that CO2 will get delivered to the concrete plant and be stored in a large cylinder just adjacent to the plant. And then it would work with our injection system in order to incorporate that into the concrete production process. You may have heard about direct air capture. Mm-hmm. This is a sort of new and emerging type of carbon capture, which holds a lot of promise in the long term. And as those technologies become more readily available and cost effective, we could easily swap out the industrially sourced CO2 for CO2 sourced directly from the air.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think if I remember correctly, there was Elon Musk announced that there's going to be a large CarbonX Prize for direct carbon capture, correct?
Yeah, so the prize is for carbon removal. And again, there's so many new phrases to describe similar initiatives. So carbon removal essentially involves taking CO2 either directly from the air or actually leveraging plants to suck it out of the air, and then doing something with it. So capturing the CO2 is just the first step. Once you've captured it, you have to do something with it. So you can do a few things with it. I mentioned some of them earlier. On the utilization side, you can use it to make valuable products like concrete, or you can store it underground in traditional sequestration projects where no value is created. I think that's the distinguishing feature between utilization and sequestration is, are you actually creating value? Because the concrete we're producing can be sold, so you're creating value. But I think the Carbon Removal X Prize is really exciting because it encompasses both the capture and the utilization aspects, whereas the CarbonX Prize that we just won was focused squarely on the utilization side. So we haven't quite decided yet if we're going to participate in the Carbon Removal X Prize, but it's definitely on our minds.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something you guys got some traction, so it could be viable. But yeah, that's just very interesting to see the space growing, and finally, it seems to me that people are really taking this seriously, and I'm really glad to be able to see that. I guess kind of speaking kind of along those lines, what can I don't know if you can speak to the exact data points on what is the approximate positive impact that using more responsibly sourced concrete like this can create on the environment globally, right? Do you know approximately how impactful this can be?
Yes, that's a great question. So there's sort of two ways to answer that. The first is there's been some studies done over the last few years which have really taken a deep dive on carbon utilization and the potential that it holds from both an environmental and economic standpoint. And what the reports say is that utilization projects, so projects that take CO2 and create valuable products from them, like concrete, could reduce global emissions by 15% and create $1 trillion of new market opportunities by 2030. How
Wow.
we play into that is we offer a solution for concrete. And just due to the sheer volume of concrete that's produced on Earth, concrete alone holds about half of that potential. So think of what one industry can actually play a really critical role in fighting climate change. So we're really excited about that. And then from our own perspective as a company, we have a mission that we established a few years ago. This is our guiding light and our North Star. Every decision we make aligns with our mission. And the mission is that we would like to reduce 500 million tons of carbon dioxide annually by the year 2030. And so how we're going to get there is through two avenues. One is continuing to deploy the technologies that we have in our portfolio today, all of which recycle CO2 and concrete, but also continuing to innovate. I think this is something that it's very much a part of our DNA, is that every day we're innovating. We're trying to make things more scalable, create more value for the customer, and to allow us to move faster. And so through these new innovation projects and through this global deployment of our technology portfolio, we think that we can achieve this 500 megaton target within the decade.
Wow, that's powerful. I think it's obviously we need aggressive goals like that in order to achieve what we're looking at here. So that's great to hear. One thing I'm also generally curious about when I talk to people who are innovating in these spaces is, what are some of the big roadblocks or, just difficult things that you've run into through trying to scale the business, or, maybe it's proving the technology, whatever it is, what are some of those big roadblocks that you've seen and that you guys have overcome?
Yeah, I think it depends when you're thinking about challenges and roadblocks. Every day there's new challenges when you're scaling a business, and especially when you think about layering on COVID, it really adds a lot of complexity to running your business. But, in the early days, it was really understanding the fundamental science behind the technology. How does it work? How do we maximize the value that we create for the customer? And then there was challenges around taking that idea out of the lab and bringing it into the real world. Because things that work well in the lab don't always work well in industrial settings. So we had to go through a few iterations about how to tweak the equipment and so on. And then we were turning our attention to sort of the business model. How do we innovate on the business model so that we can really reduce the barriers as much as possible to accelerate adoption of the technology? And now, of course, we're focused on scaling the business. And in the middle of a pandemic, our team has more than doubled in the last 12 months. That's been incredibly challenging. We haven't even physically met each other, but we've been working together for over a year now. So that's been incredibly tough. So I think maintaining that sense of culture and momentum while you're working remotely can be challenging, but it's absolutely critical for us to meet our goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Have you seen any opposition to, it sounds like it's a no-brainer, but I'm just curious, have you seen opposition to potential clients saying, why would I do this? It doesn't make sense, or maybe some misunderstandings? Are there any barriers there that you've seen?
I think the one thing that we see is that a lot of the concrete producers that we speak to want to see the technology working in their own plant. They don't necessarily trust that it's working down the street. They want to see it in their own operation. So that's been caused a few delays with getting some new producers online. But what we found is that once the producer sees the technology operating and working well in one plant, they're fairly quick to adopt it across their fleet of plants. So I think it's just that initial inertia of trying something new. It's a relatively conservative industry, so they're not used to adopting new technologies as quickly as some other industries may be. And so getting over that initial sort of hurdle of just trying something new and trusting the process and understanding that it's low risk has been a bit of a roadblock, but we've been able to overcome it and have found some creative ways to do so.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's always something that just kind of interests me, especially I think in the clean agriculture space. I'm from northern Wisconsin, where there's a lot of old school farmers, and adopting new technologies isn't their first choice most of the time. So it's interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's all about reducing barriers, right? Reducing risk, mm-hmm. and making sure that they're comfortable with trying something new, because new doesn't necessarily mean to be new is not equivalent to scary. You can point to data from other plants and show them all of the testing data to show that it's a low risk. It's an easy way for them to adapt to the low carbon economy.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. Yep. One other thing I'm curious in general, like, what do you see as the future for CarbonCure aside from scaling across the country, and maybe you could also elaborate on where you guys are currently supporting. But what are some of the other things that you see as the future for what you guys are doing?
I think I'm super optimistic about the future. I think this CarbonX Prize win is sort of just the cherry on top. We've been quite successful over the last few years in scaling up the business and bringing on new investors and new partners and new products. So I'm quite optimistic about the future. And I think with all of the net zero commitments by corporations and government, that's going to create demand for low carbon concrete, for carbon offsets, and also for progressive policy. There's some really good examples in the U.S. where government has committed to giving preferential treatment for producers to supply low carbon building materials to projects. And so those, we call them accelerators. They can dramatically impact the pace of growth. And so I'm quite excited to see some of these projects kind of scale a little bit more quickly so we can meet our 500 megaton sooner.
That's exciting. Yeah, that makes sense. And I was actually curious about that because something that is always interesting is how the government decides to act on policy and try to incentivize these people. So that's, do you have any thoughts on what you might see? I know Canada is generally a little bit more progressive on these things that helps kind of move those, those targets forward. Have there been any kind of policy moves recently in Canada that will help accelerate the adoption of these types of technologies? And do you see that, being replicated in the U.S.?
Hang on, I have to Google the name of the policy because it's like a really long-winded word. But yes, I have an opinion on this. So oddly enough, U.S. is actually the U.S. has been quite progressive on some legislation which will favor lower carbon building materials. And a great example of that is a new bill in New York called the Low Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act, or LECLA. And so this is sort of setting the stage for the best practice for how to bring online lower carbon building materials. And it includes things like actually disclosing the carbon footprint of the products that you're using. And so by asking for that, the industry has to respond. And so then they'll start looking at their carbon footprint and saying, how do I position, how do I stack up against my competitors, and what can I do to reduce that even further? It also uses a bit of creativity and actually gives an artificial price advantage on bids to lower carbon products. And so if you bring a lower carbon product to market, you're actually more likely to win that bid than your competitor who doesn't have the low carbon technology. So these are some really interesting ways to incentivize transition to a lower carbon economy. And the idea is that it's setting the stage for other jurisdictions to follow. We saw this at the city level as well in Honolulu a couple of years ago, where back in 2019, they also required that all building construction using concrete actually specifically use waste carbon dioxide in the production. And once that was sort of set as a precedent, many other cities followed. And so that's what's really exciting about these nice sort of examples of how a policy framework can be used to really transform an industry.
Yeah, I think that's important is people, because again, the adoption curve, generally speaking, some cities are going to be more interested in doing those things and are more willing to take on the risk. And then when other cities see it done, it makes it a lot easier. So that's exciting.
That's right.
I wasn't aware of that. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the other things I guess I'm just curious about is what do you think that some of the other areas of growth for in the clean tech space are in general? If you look at the future, given your kind of inside knowledge of what's happening, what are some of the biggest things that you think that there's going to be needs for innovation in, especially given that we're getting all these newer technologies that are being proven? There's obviously a lot of industry that's going to have to support those new technologies. What are some of the big areas in growth in the clean tech sector in general that you see coming?
I mean, I think if you're in clean tech right now, like, you are in the right place. I think with all of the net zero commitments, we're going to need solutions for virtually every sector on Earth. And so we've been squarely focused on decarbonizing cement and concrete, but I know there's some wonderful examples of organizations who are working across every other industry. And I think back to my previous comment, we absolutely need a portfolio approach. Like, we cannot do this alone. We need to really fully decarbonize every sector of the economy. And I think if you're in clean tech right now, it's a really exciting place to be.
Got it. Yeah, I would have definitely echo that. Hence my involvement here. It's also great to just see that everybody's really starting to just wake up to what we need to do to achieve these, helping reverse climate change. It's very, very important. Okay. Awesome. So I guess one other thing, maybe to just wrap up here is, for any entrepreneurs listening, people who want to help inspire in this space and kind of create these new technologies, let's talk about how we need a new, full suite of technologies and innovation to solve. What would your advice to entrepreneurs going into the space? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of challenges and roadblocks and hurdles. What would your advice be to them?
Seek out good partners, get more money than you think you'll need, and don't be afraid to network. I think sometimes entrepreneurs can feel a bit closed off in sharing their ideas, especially at an early stage with folks outside their circle. But I think that, at least for us, we've partnered with some companies across the value chain, and we really couldn't have done what we've done without them.
Very good. Well, I appreciate that. And, I guess just finally, where can people follow what you guys are doing? Is there any specific places or resources that you think are best for anybody interested to see your guys' growth, where they could keep an eye out for that?
Yeah, so we're pretty active on social media, so you can check us out on LinkedIn or Twitter. For anyone who's looking for a job, we're hiring. I think we have about a dozen postings out right now, so check out our career page, and you can check us out on our website.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer. I really appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to seeing what you guys continue to do. And again, congratulations on winning the CarbonX Prize.
Great. Thank you, Silas. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Jennifer. I certainly did. Please do comment below your thoughts on the show, any interesting questions that you still might want answered, any follow-ups. Glad to try my best to get answers for all of those. Also, again, congratulations to CarbonCure for securing the win on the CarbonX Prize. What an accomplishment out of so many amazing companies that that participate in that. So congratulations to them on that. And as well, if you're interested, please do get more involved with the CleanTechies Slack channel, link in the description. If you're just looking to connect with other people in the clean tech space, want to learn more, have any specific interest, again, it's a pretty good place for you to just come there and ask questions and learn more about clean tech in general and the way that we are helping to reverse climate change. Also, need to take a break to mention our sponsors, Next Wave Partners. As always, these episodes are made possible by Next Wave Partners. So if you are in any need for recruitment services in the technology, clean technology, or renewable energy and infrastructure space, please reach out to Next Wave Partners for some more information. Again, Next Wave is not just a recruiting firm, offering a lot of opportunities to give you insight to the market and really to consult with you and your companies as you grow and overcome certain challenges for talent acquisition, which is a lot of people struggle with. So definitely reach out to Next Wave for more information. info@next-wavepartners.com. And yes, thanks so much for listening. Again, please do subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Tell your friends about it. The whole goal of this is, again, to spread kind of awareness of what is going on in the clean tech space. There's so many cool things happening and so many people don't know about it, right? So that's the goal, is to help share what's happening. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.